Hi everyone, this is Karen Whitaker from the League. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to be talking today about some new micro-targeting data that we've done recently. I would just like to note that I am running solo on this webinar, so please do type in your questions, and please let me know if there's some sort of technical difficulty, if you can't see the screen, or if for some reason you're not able to hear me, please let me know. All right, so I'm calling this presentation Moneyball for bike advocacy because for those of you who don't know it, Moneyball, the book or the story, was about the sort of a David and Goliath story in Major League Baseball where the Oakland A's really, they were underfunded, they couldn't compete with the bigger teams until they sort of threw out the conventional ways of building a team, invested in some new technology, some new ideas using stats, and were able to compete and beat with some of those larger teams. And this micro-targeting work that we're doing, it's really coming off of the work of Advocacy Advance in really seeing the potential for ballot initiatives for raising transportation funding. I'm really excited about it because I think it's going to allow us to be smarter and more direct in our work. So what I'm going to talk about today is what is micro-targeting, the process and some of the results we had, how you can use the data in a campaign, and then how you can get the data and what the next steps would be in using it. So what is micro-targeting? Micro-targeting is basically using the same sort of ideas and technology that marketing and advertising has been doing for a while, and really digging down into personal characteristics that help identify who would buy that product. And in this case, it's looking at the voting data and your demographics, where you live, how you spend money, what you do for entertainment, can help identify who votes certain ways. So we're using this on who would vote for increased taxes for bike infrastructure. This opportunity came to us through Americans for Transit, and so we did the project with them. They were noticing that the transit initiatives around the country were winning at about 70%. 70% of their initiatives were winning, and they were realizing they could not have had that level of success if it was just transit riders, that there was another type of voter who was supporting transit, and they wanted to know who that person was so they could mobilize them better. Some of the questions we wanted to answer in the bike world was, if we add a bike element into a transit initiative, can we bring in new voters? We also want to know who is the bike voter and how they're the same or they're different from people who bike. And then finally talk about how we can use this data. And this is particularly on ballot initiatives, but I think there's probably other ways as well. So in order to answer those questions, we had to know three things. We had to build a model to find out who is likely to be a recreational bicyclist, who is likely to be a transportation bicyclist, and finally, who are those people that would vote for increased funding for biking. To do that, we hired a political consultant who specializes in this work, and the first step was to do some polling of over 10,000 voters. And the polling that we do for micro-targeting is very different than the polling you do for public opinions. So for instance, on a public opinion poll, we say something like, the federal government should spend more money on bicycling and walking infrastructure. Do you strongly support, somewhat support, all down the line? And we do that so that we can group everyone who would support sidewalks, everyone who would support bike infrastructure, and everyone who would support it from a very strong percentage to a very sort of, yeah, all right. And then we can say, over 80% of people support this. In micro-targeting, we're really trying to dig down to those specific characteristics that define how someone would vote on biking. And so instead of trying to group people together, we were really trying to pull people apart. And that is why this data is very specific to biking and not both biking and walking. So after polling those 10,000 people, they knew who they had talked to. They had their voter records. So they were able to identify those common characteristics in their demographics, where they live, what they buy, what they do for fun, all of that sort of helped them identify that. And then they built algorithms on who is likely to support bike funding. They applied that algorithm to over 190 million voters, voting records, and from that they gave everyone in the country a score of 0 to 100 for each of those models. So for the bike transportation model, the bike recreation model, the likelihood to vote model. In the transit world, they did likelihood to use transit, likelihood to have someone in their household who uses transit, and then likelihood to support higher taxes for transit. So to talk about the results, at the top line, two things we learned is that bike voters absolutely do add new voters to the transportation initiative, to transportation initiatives or transit initiatives. There's a lot of overlap between bike voters and transit voters, but there are also significant differences. But also that the bike voter scores are more highly correlated with the with your political affiliation than the likelihood to be a bicyclist, whether that be transportation or recreation. So again, what they did is they gave every registered voter in the U.S. a score of 0 to 100 on how likely they are to support increased taxes for biking infrastructure. A score, the higher the score, the better. So if your score is 87, you're very likely to support increased funding for bike infrastructure. If your score is 12 or 13, you're very likely to vote against that. So to show you a little bit at the national level, what this map shows is it takes all the bike voter scores, and I'm just talking the voter scores now, the bike voter scores in a zip code and gives it an average. So you can see where bike score voters are clustered. Again, the darker green, the higher the score, the more likely to vote for bike infrastructure. So looking at this map, you can see in the Northwest, you can see the California coast has higher scores. Southwest, a couple things that are surprising to me, I think, is Southern Texas. We're seeing really high scores down there. Or if you look at Michigan, you're seeing really high scores up in Michigan. We've also got decent scores along the East Coast. So that's the bike score. When you look at the transit score model, this is the same thing. It's the average transit voter score. People who are likely to pay higher, are likely to vote to raise taxes for better transit infrastructure. Same score is 0 to 100. 100 is most likely to support higher taxes for transit, and it's the darker colors. So again, you see that it's highest on the coast of California. You can see up in Massachusetts into Vermont has some of the higher scores. And then you can see those places in the Southwest. And now I'm going to show you these two maps together. And again, here you can see where the bike vote is stronger than the transit vote in a number of areas. Again, Michigan is an easy one to see in the mitten. Southern Texas, Minnesota, Wisconsin has some higher levels. The Southwest is some places where they have both high scores. California coast, both high scores. That New England area, high scores. If you have any questions, this is a good time to add some. I'll stop in a minute. Oh, we got a question. Yes. I see the question on Alaska and Hawaii. I'll have to go back to the consultant and get those maps. They didn't, these are their maps, but we do have those scores. Okay. Okay, so that's the score on a national level. What we also have is the distribution of scores on a state level. So what you're looking at here on the horizontal or x-axis, you're seeing the scores, the 0 to 100 in favor of bike policy. When you're looking at the screen on your right, public score, the public transit score on your left. Now we're looking at the state of Oregon. On the y-axis, you're seeing the number of Oregonians who were given that score of 0 to 100. So if you look at the bike policy score, so bike funding score, that red line is right around the 50 mark. And you can see there's almost 70,000 Oregonians that get the score of 50. If you look at on the transit score, it's a little bit lower. It's under 20,000 have a score of 50. So a couple things I want to point out on this. I use the state of Oregon because their graphs, the shape of their graphs, are very similar to the national average, where in the biking world, you really have 50% almost of the population that is between that 40 to 60. They're, you know, they're wishy-washy, and we need to get out there and talk with them. On the transit side, you do see that slope down like that. But remember, they win 70% of their ballot initiatives. So there's a good argument there that a good campaign and in the right area can win. And if they can win in that public transit model, they should definitely, we should be able to do something similar than that in the bike model. I just got the question of, can we get state-by-state maps? I will check on that. I can get you state-by-state distributions like this. I can give you these graphs, and I should be able to get you the zip codes by state with the numbers. And I am working on that. It may take a week or so to do that. I do have that. So again, going back to the state data, let's say Oregon wanted to do an amendment to increase taxes for bike infrastructure. If you look at this bike curve, they probably want to start talking to everybody over 50%. So they would need to know who those people are. When you get this data, you get the voter file records. So you have not only their scores, but you have their name, their contact information, their bike score, and also a score on how likely they are to vote, as well as some of that other data. All right, great. One of the things I have been asked is, can we get a look at the algorithms? Can we get the algorithm so they can tell us who we should target? I was really hoping that as well. I was hoping we would get things like, If you're white, if you're male, if you're over 50, then you're more likely to be a recreational rider. And that would be data we could use with our own membership lists. But the algorithms are not that simple. So this is, for example, one of the algorithms that they used. Said if you're female, if more than 6.67% of the people in your census block work in electronics or appliance stores, and if your TV broadcast score is higher than 0.36, then you're more likely to be a bike commuter. So this is one example of an algorithm. There were about 30 that went into that bike transportation, bike commuter algorithm. So they're not actually that helpful at that level. But I wanted you to see this to see how detailed these algorithms are and where these scores come from. So how do you use the data once you have it? I'm going to go through a simple example here of how you could use it for a ballot initiative. So let's assume you have a ballot on an initiative on the 2014 November ballot to increase taxes for bike infrastructure. And let's say that your entire universe is 500 registered voters. So you know that if you have a 56% turnout rate at a midterm election, that's about 280 expected voters. And let's assume you need a simple majority to win, so that's 141 yes votes. But we're going to put in a 10% factor because you want to have some safety. And then let's assume that your outreach capacity is that you can do one face-to-face contact by phone or by canvassing to 180 people. So how do you use this data for that? Well, first you want to look at that bike voter support, how likelihood they are to vote for increased taxes for bike lanes and trails, and that is on your y-axis or your vertical axis. And you want to compare that to their likelihood to show up and vote at all, which is the 0 to 100 score on your x-axis or your horizontal axis. And these are actual voting records of people in Alameda County. We're using Alameda County because they actually have a ballot initiative this year. And their initiative, if you remember, they had the same initiative 2 years ago, and they lost by, I think, 300 votes. So we're hoping with data like this that we can be really smart about how you do your campaigning so you can get that extra 300 votes. So here's your universe. The first thing you want to do is identify your base. So same graph showing people who have a likelihood to vote score of over 70 and a likelihood of bike funding support over 70. This is your base. These are not the people you need to canvass. They're not the people you need to get out to vote. They are, however, a good base of people that might be your volunteers. They might be your funders of this campaign. You'll also, when you get the data, you also get a wealth screen so you can look at that kind of thing. Or they may be people that you hit up for membership. But no matter what, these are your supporters. You want to send them at least a letter. You want them to know that you're responsible for this campaign. But you don't need to count them in your 180 people that you need to canvass or call to get out the vote. The next thing you want to look at is who you need to persuade. So these are folks who are very likely to vote, 70% or greater to vote, but their support for biking is a little bit, is not as secure. So for this model, I'm using people with a bike score of 50 to 70. And some campaigns you could see that score go down to 40 or so. But for this campaign, there's enough support in that 50 to 70 piece that there's 158 people that you want to contact and convince them to vote with you on this amendment, or on this. The next thing you want to do is identify the people that you want to target for get out the vote. So these are people that have a high bike score but are iffy on how often they go out to vote, particularly in a midterm election. So this is looking at a bike score of 60 to 100, but a vote score of 30 to 70. And you've got 27 people there. So if you add your persuasion and your get out to vote people, that's 185. That's manageable. You can figure from there, that's your 180, right? It's a little bit higher, but you can do that. So what this data helps you do in this kind of campaign is a couple of things. You can focus your resources on your movable voters. There's 320 people you don't even need to reach individually, and that's good to know. You can also separate out who you need to just get to the polls versus who you need to persuade on your issue. Some of the best practices on get out the vote is that you don't want to be persuading them when you're trying to get out the vote. What works in get out the vote is that civic duty, civic responsibility, you're important. And as soon as you add in your issue campaign, you lose them on that, and it can actually reduce your effectiveness. So you really want to do separate get out the vote, separate persuasion. This allows you to do it. It also allows you to test and segment your messages. So again, looking at those 500 voters in Alameda County, on the y-axis is that bike funding support score, 0 to 100. But this time, excuse me, that's the y. On the x, on the horizontal, we're looking at their transit funding score. So we're comparing bike versus transit. The two lines in the middle are marking the 50% line. So in the upper right-hand corner, these are the folks that really support both issues. But when you're talking about who your canvassers should be and what message they should lead from, this is really helpful. If you look at these folks in the red circles, their transit score is not great to middle, but their bike score is really high. So these are the folks that Bike East Bay, maybe the ones who want to go out there and say, hi, I'm from Bike East Bay. I want to talk to you about this great initiative that's going to be really helpful for people who bike and will be beneficial for people who take transit too. But these folks down here would be the opposite. You'd want to talk about, the benefits of transit, and maybe leave the bike piece out of it. And maybe it's a different canvasser that goes to it. And these folks over here, you don't even need to bother to talk to. You don't have a winning message for them. So with that, I will pause and see if there's any more questions. All right. Moving forward on that, I'll talk about how to get the data in a minute, but I wanted to show a little bit of data on the other models, on who's a recreational rider and who is a transportation rider. For those of you who were at the Alliance retreat, I didn't have this data up at the time. But this is looking at the commuter bicycling model. Again, the scores 0 to 100 are on the x-axis. The number of individuals with that score are on the y-axis. And the red line in the middle is about 50%. So you can see how that score looks. This is the recreational rider. Again, looking nationally, the score 0 to 100. If you're in the 80s, you're very likely to be a recreational rider. If you're in the 0 to 100, 0 to 10, you're very unlikely to be a recreational rider. And then that's the number of individuals on the side. So there's over 5 million Americans who have about a 50% score. So again, sort of in the middle, I'm showing you the bike data here. When you look at transit riders, it's pretty much the opposite. Instead of a bell curve, it's the upside down curve. So there's some people that are extremely likely never to use transit and some who are extremely likely to always use transit. So it's a recreational. Here's the two together, recreation on top, transportation on the bottom. Sorry, the colors are the same on this one. But you can see the difference. The recreational model fits a lot more of the registered voters. I also ran these for a couple of states, and like I said, we have these by state too. So this is Montana, which is interesting because their commuter score is higher than most states across the country. That's the one on the bottom. Their recreational piece is also pretty high. Louisiana, very different story, right? So definitely have significant number of recreational bicyclists, less on the transportation side. And then I also threw in DC so you could see what a city looks like. Recreation on top, transportation on the bottom. And you can see that the transportation scores, there's a lot more people likely to do that. Okay. So again, then the question sort of next steps. A couple of things. I've talked about ballot initiatives. There are other applications. If you are a 501c4, you can use it in candidate elections. For C3, this is also, there's ways to use this for state or local legislation or a local election. If you have this data and you're trying to show a mayoral candidate that they should be supportive of biking and walking, this may help. If you have a piece of legislation at the state level, you can look at the data in those state districts and find out, you know, who could be congressional targets, or if you know who those targets are, how to then use it. There's definitely some membership and fundraising applications. I'll talk about that in a minute. And I think for us at the League, we're really interested in what kind of research can we do and how can we continue to feed this model and make it more and more robust as we move forward. So there are some limitations. It's not free. There's a cost to getting this data. The League owns the bicycle models. Americans for Transit owns the transit models. But we don't own the 200 million voter records, and there's a cost to that, which I will get to in a minute. We don't have a walk score. We didn't, because we split it with transit, we only had the resources and the polling questions in order to do one mode, and we did biking. When you get the voter record, it doesn't always generate emails. Some records have them, some don't. There is a matching service you can use, but that is there's also a cost to that. The bike data is not as robust as the transit data, and you can see from the models. I'm going to just switch through. So well, anyways, I won't go all the way through, but you can see like this kind of thing when you're seeing the chutes that go up. That's generally more robust data. They have more data on that. When you look at the transit scores have a lot more of that because political campaigns in the past have asked that question, where are transit riders? That has not been asked of bicycling. So this is the first time this has been done on bicycling issues, and we're just starting to use that data now. So that's why you saw some of the smoother graphs on the bike pieces. And also, again, I would say this is new to the biking movement, so we're still building expertise. I'm learning along with you. So the more questions you have, the more we can move this forward, and the more we can learn together. So how do you get the data? This is a big question. So as I said, we own the models, but you have to rent or subscribe to CATALIST, which is a company that maintains the voter record files. They sell subscriptions. You can get it The shortest time you can get it is 4 months, or you can get it for a year. There are some cost savings in getting it for the whole year. And they sell it, the smallest size they sell is roughly the size of a congressional district, or 450,000 records. So you can see some of the, these are two examples of costs. As I said, we own the data, so just because you get the Catalyst subscription doesn't mean you get the data. We will, of course, we sort of flip the switch. We would do that for our friends and our affiliated organizations. But if someone else, say the Sierra Club, wants to use it, we could work out a deal with them so that we also get some data back. And we would like to be part of this, at least at the beginning, so we can continue to learn. So again, if you want to see the Catalyst system in action and think about how to use it, there is a Catalyst training webinar every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. Sorry, folks on the West Coast, that's their time. And what you need to do is contact this email, clientservices@catalyst.us, to sign up for one of their websites and see how their system works. Now, so one of the other questions that I've gotten from folks is, how do you use this for fundraising, and is this usable for fundraising? And the answer is yes, you can use it for fundraising. For Catalyst, they developed it for the highest use to be advocacy, and they said that two things really help define who's going to be a donor. One is people who've donated to other causes in the past, so you could run the scores of donation versus high bike support score, and then asking them to take action, and then once they've joined their group, then you return to them for membership and donation. I think a lot of you folks know that, but I just wanted to put that out there that they asked me to do that. So I have a question. Let me see if I can get it. So this is the how do you get the data sets. Yeah, you need to get a subscription to Catalyst. And it is based on population size and the year that you ask. So presidential year most expensive, a year when there's no federal elections, that's the cheapest. Was the recreational rider data part of the poll question? Yes. So the polling questions, we asked folks how often, or do you ride for recreation and how often? And we asked, do you use your bike for a transportation trip, such as commuting to work or going to the store or going to movies or a friend's house? So while it is sometimes labeled as commuter, it is really a transportation model. So they did the same thing for the are you likely to be a recreational rider that they did for are you likely to pay higher taxes for bike infrastructure. They polled those 10,000 people. They took the people who said they were recreational riders, identified the common characteristics, built some algorithms, and applied that to all the voter models. Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. So this is giving you an idea of what the prices are. If you want the specific prices for your area, let me know what your area is. They're not all uniform, and I'm not 100% sure why, but these are some places we asked. So there's the geography. The CD equivalent is number of congressional districts equivalent. You do not have to be, does not have to be a congressional district. It's just the same population size. So as I was saying in costs, there are some cost savings if you go for a full year versus 4 months. There's also some cost savings if you go to an off-election year versus an election year. You'll also see that there is an export limit on how much you can do. That means you can play with the data as much as you want and build different models, but as soon as you export that to your hard drive, that comes off of your export limits. These are the prices for the advocacy model. There are more expensive models that don't have export limits. So I think, yep, that's all I have. Are there any more questions? So I would say for folks who are interested, definitely get on the Catalyst training on Wednesday. You can see it some more. Send me the list or the area that you'd want the data for. And give me a call about what you would use it for and what you're thinking about, because we would really like to partner in this. I'm going to get out of the screen for a second and pull up, if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. So what I'm going to show you, I'll show you what I have, and I can work on getting these out to you. So I'm going to look at, Nancy just asked a question, so I'm going to show Maine. This is the commute score for Maine. Again, this is about 50%, if you can see that. And then when we look at recreational score, you can see the recreational score is very high in Maine. You've got a lot of people on this side. So what I would say, you can also, I will send out an email when I have the zip codes, when we have it by zip code. If you want these charts, let me know. I already have some requests. It's taking me a while to run through them, but I will get them out to you eventually. If you have something going on this November that you want to use the data for this November, please do call me, and we will prioritize those. All right. Let me see. I also saw, so Alaska, I think I saw someone from Alaska on the call. It's a recreational score and the bike commuting score, looks like. So you can see the different states have different shapes. Let me see. So, yeah, so that's all I have. Again, let me know if and how you're going to use it, and I will show you. This is Alaska's transportation score on the bottom, recreation score on the top. All right, if there's no more questions, that's great. Thanks for joining me. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you. We're really excited about this data and want to know how we can get out in the field and get it being used. So thanks.